Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Liskey, and thank you for joining our webinar on authentication, which is the second in our Apple webinar cybersecurity series based on Nat Bongiovanni's A.P.P.L.E ebook. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and we will get to them during the 15-minute audience Q&A at the end of the session. Now I'll turn it over to Nat to introduce himself and get started.
Thanks, Katie, and good morning to our panelists and audience. As Katie mentioned, I'm the CTO for the federal subsidiary of NTT DATA, and last year I co-wrote a book called An Apple Day Keeps Ransomware at Bay. In July, I did a webinar that was an overview of the Apple acronym. This webinar is a deep dive into authentication, that first letter A in Apple. Consistently, the top reason for organizations to be compromised is because of credential failure, and most of them are people mistakes. Today, we are going to talk about how you authenticate people, and we will save the discussion of devices and geography for a later presentation. This is our agenda. We're going to introduce our panelists, do a panel discussion, audience Q&A, and then we'll have some closing remarks. But let me introduce our panelists. We have Phil Wenger, retired MAX.gov Policy Lead. Phil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks. My name is Phil Wenger. I retired recently from the Office of Management and Budget, where I was responsible for the systems used to collect and publish and analyze the president's budget. The last 15 years, we provided some of the capabilities that we developed through this MAX system to other agencies as a shared service. That included an authentication platform that ended up serving about 250,000 users from over 100 agencies with multiple use cases and lots of different types of authentication. And we learned a lot through those efforts. One thing I came away with, and you'll keep hearing me say this, is a passion for sharing technology and knowledge across agencies. That is, this stuff is really hard, and we shouldn't have to repeat the same lessons at every different agency. That's it.
Thanks, Phil. And so next is Adam McBride, the HHS ICAM IdAM Program Manager. Adam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. As Nat stated, I'm Adam McBride. I'm with HHS. The actual agency I am in with HHS is the Program Support Center. We're a shared service agency that we, assist all the HHS agencies. We're basically the GSA of HHS. I lead just about everything identity within HHS. One of the key elements I think that will be relevant to this discussion is a lot of the external user cases that we have for HHS. I am retired military police out of the U.S. Army, and my passion was IT. I retired from the Army and went along with my passion was IT, and here I am. I'm still serving our taxpayer, and hopefully their dollar is well spent. That's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. And Christine, would you like, Christine Halvorsen, the Okta Public Sector Chief Technology Officer. Would you like to introduce yourself, Christine?
Yes, and first I want to say, Adam, my tax dollars are very well spent for all the work and all the support you've given the government. So thank you so much. So I am Christine Halvorsen. As Nate said, I am the CTO for Okta for public sector. I came by way of Okta after 23 years of federal government service as well. Spent 23 years at the FBI as an FBI agent senior executive, but ran many digital transformation projects. And really, at the end of the day, identity was part of everything I did, whether it was investigating a case in the identity of a person or whether it was an identity in the cyber world that we were trying to protect our infrastructure as well, the infrastructure of the United States. So I'm very happy to be here today. Thanks for inviting me to talk about this really important topic.
Thanks, Christine. So now that we're done with the introductions, let's move on to the panel discussion. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that everybody can see all of the participants. 1 second. Having a little technical glitch here. So why don't we start with some questions? And I'll start with Phil Wenger. Can you do a high-level overview of what is authentication, why it's important? Phil, I think you might be on mute.
Thank you. Better?
That's much better.
All right. Authentication is the mechanism we use to ensure that only people who should be accessing our systems and data are allowed to do that. It's a primary building block of securing IT systems, and it's a primary building block of zero trust. Microsoft defines it as the process that an individual, application, or service goes through to prove their identity before gaining access to digital systems. We're going to focus on the user. That is, for user authentication, individuals logging into computer systems. This includes both proving the identity of the user and proving the security of the session. Both of those things are important to protect our systems from bad actors. For example, I might know 100% certainty the identity of the user, but maybe someone stole their credentials, so I'm not so confident of the session. Or maybe I have a very secure session, but I never really verified the identity of the person. And those are both reasonable use cases for certain kinds of information. We can improve the level of identity proofing by moving away from self-asserted identity towards in-person identity verification, and we can talk about that more later. We can improve the level of authentication by moving away from logging in with just a user ID and password and towards requiring 2 different factors, something you know, like a password or PIN, something you have, like a computer or hard token, something you are, like a fingerprint, a face scan, or a retina scan. In a lot of cases, we're going to require one thing from 2 of these 3 categories to be confident that this person is who they say they are and that the session applies to the user that created it.
Thanks, Phil. Adam, what type of authentication use cases does HHS have?
Basically, going off of what Phil explained as far as what authentication is and how it's used, HHS covers a wide variety of authentication, and we leverage the guidance that NIST lays out with 863. There's several other publications that we use, but mostly for identification authentication, is the NIST 863.3. They do have a new one coming out, -4, which I think has made strides compared to what the current guidance is. So hopefully we're going to see that at the beginning of the new year. But the authentication levels, as Phil explained, we use AAL1 through AAL3, and HHS has hundreds of public-facing applications that require an external user to be authenticated for one, and then we also have our internal applications which require a little bit higher strength of authentication and identity proofing, which we use the PIV card, DoD uses, and the military uses the CAC card, basically the same level of identity and authentication to access the internal applications and cross-government applications. But HHS, for external use, we do leverage the private sector for credential service providers, where they go through the process of identity proofing and authenticating the individual, and we do leverage that. We have grant organizations within HHS. They require the IAL, AAL levels, which is a higher security posture. And there are many of applications that don't require that, and it's more of an IAL1, AAL2, which is what we determine as multi-factor authentication or non-phishing or phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. And I think I'll stop there so I don't talk forever. I'm going to get kind of geeky with this stuff. So if I talk too much, just wave your hand.
Well, yeah. So Adam, I think that's an issue with all of the panelists and myself included, and biting my lip to not say, hey, why don't we add this or add that? But to that point, hey, Christine, would you like to talk about some advances in authentication trends and methods we're seeing?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of pull together the points that Adam and Phil were talking about, and I think a lot of this may sound cliche, right? But as we look at the world, right, it's completely transformed after COVID. And there's more workers and students, right, that are shifting to these remote arrangements, even being hired remotely, right? And cyber actors, as Phil mentioned, are really aware of the shift and are exploiting this new normal. And so when we're talking about authentication, I think there's really two sides, and you heard it in the conversations we're having. There's the user side, right, the identity itself, and then there's the IT side and the IT perspective. And so when we talk about it, right, the user experience, on average, a person has about 100 passwords or more. And they end up reusing them often, not only in the workplace, but also as a resident or a consumer, right? And this is cumbersome, painful, and it is really a weakness, right, to the cyber actors. And so to help mitigate that, I think you've heard some of this, Adam talked about it, you know, in the NIST, and Phil's talks about it, is that single sign-on and MFA, right? And that's where kind of the IT teams come in. And so when conducting that piece of it, that authentication, they must really take into account that, again, what Phil mentioned, right now, a password is a possession factor, and that's what a lot of people have been using. It's kind of the weakest, right? The possession factor is, again, something they have, something they know, something they are. And then you have now what's coming in, as we mentioned in the trends and patterns, is that inherence factor, the biometric factors, right? It's something that's unique to each user. And that's what we see as the strongest authentication methods right now. And so what we're seeing across that is it really depends on your culture and organization of what's going to work. And like, for example, our federal customers use CAC-PIV cards, right? State and local agencies are using FIPS, right? So there's all different things coming in. But really, I think the move that we're seeing is a lot of people talking about passwordless, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But I think, you know, when we're talking about this, implementing any MFA or SSO has to be frictionless as much as possible for the user, or else they'll go around it.
And we all know about users going around their authentication mechanisms, because I think everybody's had experience with that. But, you know, that kind of relates to something we've talked about a little bit lightly, and that's identity assurance. And so how does identity assurance fit into this equation? And Phil, could you answer that? Phil, you're on mute.
Yep. Okay. So Adam and Christine talked a little bit about some use cases and technology, and then and Christine, thank you, the importance of a seamless user experience, because that's important. Because if I make it hard for my users, they're either going to go find a different approach or they're going to work around it. I want to back up a little bit and talk about assurance levels. And so for the federal government, this is absolutely totally critical. For outside the federal government, this is going to apply to your use cases as well, but for different reasons. So in the federal government, we talk about authentication assurance levels. Adam mentioned 1, 2, and 3. Authentication assurance level 1 is some confidence, maybe a user ID and password, but not a lot of confidence. It's easy to spoof or hack or whatever. Authentication assurance level 2 adds a second distinct factor. So if I have a password, then I also need, which is something I know, then I also need something I have or something I am, like my fingerprint or card or something. And it's authentication level 3 is kind of the same, but it adds an improved cryptological token of some kind. Identity, though, isn't the security of the session, it's the security of the my confidence that the individual is who they say they are. So some things, and again, we have the 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3. Identity assurance level 1 is I have some confidence, but there's no real requirement that this is linked to a real person. I might create a Facebook account and call myself Daffy Duck, and that kind of meets identity assurance level 1. it's appropriate for that kind of use case. You're just basically saying that the person who created the account is the same person who has access to the account. Identity assurance 2 is a much higher level. It's, I have maybe asked for a photocopy or a fax of the driver's license. I've looked at some sort of digital document to ensure that this person really is who they say they are. And there's agencies that require me to do that, to send them a copy of something, or maybe they're going to mail something to my home address, and if I get that something, then they have some higher confidence. Identity assurance level 3 is more appropriate for access to very sensitive information, and it's going to require in-person identity proofing. That is, I have to actually go somewhere or at least do a supervised remote identity proofing of some kind. And it might even require a background check, like with the government's P.I.V. cards, CAT cards, which is the HSPD-12 program. We require a suitability check. So if somebody gives me a government-issued P.I.V. card, I know that not just that they are who they say they are and that somebody at their agency has verified that face-to-face, but I also know that the federal government has determined that they're suitable. So those levels are really helpful for us in parsing how confident we are in the identity and the session of the person. We also have federation assurance levels. Adam and I are both in shared services business, or I was. And federation assurance level is really important when you trust a third party for some of your identity process. And as Adam mentioned, these are all described in the NIST publication called Digital Identity Guidelines, which we affectionately refer to as 800-63. That's it.
Thanks, Phil. It's actually is really kind of intense. So it's kind of like you have a matrix of identities and assurance levels to figure out, if you're in this box, this is what you need. And that's actually kind of cool. Adam, could you give some examples of different levels of assurance or identity?
Yes, I do have my notes, but you said something that really tipped my brain. So one of the key things I do want to put out there is that, for the assurance levels and identity levels, each application has to determine what level they are at, right? And right now we have the digital risk management process, and within that process we have the digital identity risk assessment, which we call DIRA, right? So each application went prior to being connected to the network and allowing their users to have access for permitted access, they do have to go through these processes, right? So these applications do determine at what level of assurance that they need and what level of identity proofing they need. With that, see what you did, Nat? You say a key word and it makes my brain go. But for HHS, we do have the capability for P.I.V. CAC, which is the AAL3. We do have capabilities for FIDO and passkey, and we have phishing-resistant MFA. With the conversation that you and I had earlier, is it okay if I differentiate between like a FIDO and a passkey? Maybe folks know, but maybe they don't know. So a lot of folks like intertwine FIDO and passkey. And what folks have got to understand is that they're a little different. FIDO you can't share with other devices, right? It's a one device item. Passkey, as an example, so I have an iPhone, I have an iPad, and I have a Mac, right? Basically, that token is shared with all of those devices, where a FIDO, you can't do that. You have to individually leverage each device with that one token. Passkey can be shared amongst all those devices that I have control of, right? It is secure, but I just want to make sure everybody knows the difference between the two. And I do see a chat question, but we'll get to that at the end. Sorry.
We'll get to that later. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but we do leverage commercial credential service providers to proof out our public users, and of course within our internal and other federal government agencies, we do have the intake adjudication process, which gives us the level that those folks need. And we do issue out hard tokens for FIDO, but those have to be FIPS 140-2 validated tokens only. And with those hard tokens, a lot of folks think like once you issue it, it's good. It's not. Certificates still have to be updated. And if that hard token becomes expired to where it's no longer serviced, you have to exchange it for a new one and get your credentials reissued to you on that device. And those devices like that, HHS, so healthcare, human services, a lot of doctors within HHS, like they'll go into surgery, but they have like their dirty room. It's like the room prior to going into the actual surgical room. They use those devices for the computers to enter in all the information, and that device has to stay in the dirty room. Then they sterilize themselves and go and perform surgery, and then they come back after surgery and then enter all that information for the patient. It stays within that room. So that's just an example of how we use the FIDO with the hard token. I'll shut up now because I'll just keep talking.
Thanks, Adam. Adam, that was actually really good. Christine, how would you describe the technology trends in assuring and protecting identity? And I think you could probably expand on some of what Adam just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Adam, you bring up and Phil bring up many great points. And especially I was having this discussion with a customer yesterday. Just say someone loses, right, their FIDO, right, key, and what do you do then, right? How do you respond and what do you do? And I think that's, where we're sitting here at, Okta and seeing the trends. I mean, for us, really, there's 3 trends we're looking at, right? Going passwordless on a lot, right? And we have FastPass, which is AAL3. And then we're really going beyond MFA, right? So I know Phil and Adam have been talking about the identity itself and the person logging on, but for us, it's really the IT side too, right? Bringing that perspective in of going beyond MFA and being able to continuously monitor that identity in the system, right? And seeing what they're doing and where they're going. And then the third, I would say, is really that continuous authentication and authorization process, right? So looking at it from sharing signals across applications on your platform. And if a user is in one area and they look like they're behaving a little weird, but it pops as a low risk, okay, that might be one thing. But then all of a sudden they're in another application and now it looks like a medium risk. And if you put the 2 together, it's actually a high risk, right? Across your being able to take action on that user, whether it's you making them re-authenticate, right? Whether it's you're doing a universal logout at the same time and sending a note to the SOC, right, to look at those incidents. It's, for us, it's really going, again, beyond that MFA and looking at what that should look like within the network itself to continuously re-authenticate that person and make sure that they're accessing the right resources at the right time by the right person. And so that's kind of where we're sitting. And especially with the passwordless, I just want to bring this up because I think passwordless for us is very important. We as Okta, we're passwordless. And I think one of the things you have to realize is on average, a worker spends 13 minutes a week resetting passwords. And that's 8 days out of any year they're spending just resetting passwords. So it's like a whole week's of work, right, missed. And even, maintaining passwords is very expensive. So I bring that up because I think everybody's trying to save money and be more efficient. And then there's ways in the technology to use it that I think you could get more efficient. And that's just one of the topics I just wanted to bring up to talk about today.
Thanks, Christine. That was actually really, really interesting. And it kind of jumps into something we've already started talking about. And I'm going to ask Phil to kind of expound on it, especially at a strategic level. And that is, how do you decide which levels to implement for an application? And I know Adam talked about a couple frameworks, but if I'm a commercial organization, can you take it what Adam said and kind of make it a little bit easier for the average user to understand?
Sure. So our goal here is to understand and mitigate risk, but also to understand our user experience, what capabilities are available to them, and make their experience as smooth as possible. We talk in the government on risk in terms of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So I can, of course, the best way to protect the confidentiality of my data and the integrity of my data is to unplug my systems. Then nobody can get to it, and it's absolutely confident. But it's not a very good experience for my users. And not all users have access to all kinds of capabilities. Like somebody may be on a cell phone, somebody may be coming in from a secure facility. Somebody may be coming in from their government-issued computer, or somebody may be coming in from their home computer. Some services that are more secure but cost money might not be available to some of those users. And so it's important to kind of understand your data, understand your user community, and protect your data appropriately. So in my agency, we had some fairly sensitive policy information, maybe the president's budget the week before it was released, or pre-decisional rulings or whatever, that we would want to protect that at the highest level. It's okay to make it difficult for people to get to. We're going to focus on confidentiality over availability, for example. Whereas our public website, we want people to be able to get to that, especially in an emergency. And so we're going to focus on availability there, but also integrity. I don't want the public website to be changed. So I want to protect the ability to change the website at a very high level. But the way to get to it, I'm just not going to protect that at all. We started out verifying users by email. That is, if you logged in from a government-issued computer, government-issued email address, we would verify that you could receive email to that address. And that was where we were 10, 15 years ago. And it was appropriate at the time for the kind of data that we had. As we had more sensitive data, and as we matured, and the NIST publication, the NIST guidance matured, we added HSPD 12 cards, which gives me very high level confidence that the person has been verified by their agency, and that their session actually is very standard, very secure. And we might have data that we protect still using user ID password, because it's just not that important to protect it's way more important to protect the availability than the confidentiality. But we'll use the PIV and CAC cards for the more sensitive data. As Adam said, the NIST standards provide a really great framework of laws and policies for the federal government. For the commercial folks, they still provide a good reference as to how somebody else does it, but you may also have other guidance that's available to you.
Thanks, Phil. And that was actually really enlightening. So I want to kind of pivot a little bit here and talk about how sometimes this stuff goes wrong. And Adam and I were having a conversation the other day, and I thought, this is an interesting topic. So Adam, do you have anything interesting to add about how this sometimes goes wrong?
No, because HHS doesn't do anything wrong. I'm kidding. Well, we don't, but there are circumstances where things do go awry. Going back to leveraging, private sector credential service providers, right? I don't want to give any names, but let's say we do have an example from HHS where we had some providers providing a certain level of authentication and identity, and one of our systems was actually hacked and a lot of money was taken. And what we found was the higher education process for their authentication and identity couldn't be relied upon as much as it was. There were certain vulnerabilities where professors or anyone who had any access to our grant system, they were able to get their accounts taken by social engineering, and the individuals were able to go to authentication app vendor and tell them, hey, my phone was lost, this is my new phone. And they would give the social security number, all this stuff that the actual user had, right? They social engineer got all this information, and they were successfully able to get access to that authentication app. And that was the weak link. So when they went to the third party vendor that we were using, they were able to easily get through that process because they've authenticated and had gone through the process of getting things changed over. And then that led to the fraud and the taking of the money. So we tightened that up. We fixed all of those issues. And our takeaway from that is that, some vendors that we use in the private entities, they have fraud capabilities on their front end, and they're able to distinguish, what is a risk and what isn't a risk. Unfortunately, the ones that were initially used did not have that capability, right? And so we changed the vendor, and now we have that fraud capability at the front end, and we're able to detect, I would say 99.9% of any fraudulent activity prior to getting into the permitted application. Now, since grants is a high value asset in HVA, we have a fraud system on the back end now. So a lot of the credential service providers that do have the fraud capability, they provide that service up to the handshake, right? Once the handshake happens, we didn't have anything once the individual was in our system. We do now, so we continue that aspect on the other side, on the federal side. And I would highly recommend any federal agency, if they have that capability, please put all high value assets behind it. That way you can, keep the money safe and the user data safe. So things can go wrong. When it happens, you just got to quickly mitigate it and get things resolved so everyone's in a safe place with their data and taxpayer dollars. I can't stress that enough.
So I'm going to want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we talked about high value assets, and I think there's a real key component here. And so that when you talked about the assurance levels, you talked about authentication assurance levels, you talked about identity assurance levels, and then you talked about federated assurance levels. So in essence, what you were just describing about using third-party authentication mechanisms is really how do I deal with federations? How do I, when I'm federating with another organization? And I think this is really important because a lot of the people that help support the government have a big supply chain. And so their supply chain becomes a critical component. And can you talk just a little bit about how that federated assurance works? I can't talk right now.
Yeah. How much time do we have left? This is, I'll try to keep it brief. I really will, but this is what I really geek out on. I can't even speak because I get so excited. See what you did to me? So this is a process that we're really working hard right now to accomplish. Myself and many other folks across the federal government, we have taken the NIST guidelines from 863.3. We created an actual standard and requirement that we pushed to GSA, and GSA now has a SIN just for credential service providers, and for those credential service providers to get onto that SIN, they have to meet all of the standards that we set forth, right? So one is to create a space to where everyone meets that requirement, and we know that they meet the requirement because they have gone through certain steps to get there. That was completed. That is now being established, and I think there's 2 or 3 vendors on that SIN now. So that's available for local, state, and federal governments to leverage. The other thing is to get the federal trust network established. You know, you have to get the agreements between agencies established to allow that to happen. And so one of the, I would say the biggest factor in all this in the federated space is that when a user comes in and creates that account, they may have several avenues. Like there may be like 3 different credential service providers that user has an account with. But when we federate, we need that one special place to where it doesn't matter which CSP that the user uses, it's all linked to one account for the federal government, right? And we use that one account to allow the federated use for that individual. We're able to monitor it, and I don't say track, we can audit the usage and where the individual goes, and if something goes awry, then we can take care of it. But the federated nature of federated trust network for the entire federal government, and that I think would apply to anyone, because we have done a proof of concept in the healthcare industry where we proofed this out, and hopefully we're getting the government online to actually provide what I just explained to the entire federal government. It'd be a great thing. Keep your eyes and ears open. That's all I can say. I can't get into it too much, but I know Phil, maybe Phil can highlight that one, but I can't.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go to Christine now, because I think so. We've talked about some really important topics about how do you assure identity, how do we assure authentication, how do we assure our federation. What do you see the next steps after an organization establishes some strong authentication? And by the way, feel free to comment on what Adam just talked about also.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of comment on kind of the Phil and Adam conversation, and then answer your question if you don't mind. So I think, you know, when we're sitting as that third party vendor, one of the things that we've seen is exactly that cyber supply chain attack, right, occurring. And again, I can't believe we haven't even talked about zero trust. I know it's not, you know, the framework, but if you look at the 5 pillars, right, there's space between all those pillars. And in that space, that's where the risk is sitting. And that's why the cyber supply chain attacks, in my opinion, are so successful, because you have different vendors sitting across all those. And so one of the things Okta has been working really hard on this year is kind of our identity threat protection solution, in that we're getting shared. We integrate with 7,600 other applications out of the box. And so what we're doing is they're sharing threat signals with us into Okta, so that Okta can correlate those, as I mentioned earlier, to try to get ahead of those cyber supply chain attacks. And Adam, to your point, to the fraud on the back end, right? Where they're seeing all of a sudden a user comes in, it's authenticated on the front, but all of a sudden they're doing things on the back end that they shouldn't be doing. And the different applications are alerting, and we're getting all those alerts and then can compile them to a higher risk score. And then depending on what policies you write for that, again, you can either make them re-authenticate with another MFA factor, or you can universally log them out while sending notifications automatically to the SOC while the SOC looks at it, right? So then they're not moving horizontally across. So to the point of, we're trying to get ahead, we're trying to be proactive against those cyber supply chain attacks, using identity as kind of the pillar for that across the zero trust pillar. So it's just one of the things that, you know, for me, I think the cyber supply chain attacks and the phishing and the social engineering are the biggest threats right now. And so any way you can get ahead of that, based on all these conversations we're having today, will give you even more stronger best practices and stronger cybersecurity posture across your enterprise. And now to answer your question around, like, what do we see after authentication? I know we talked a little bit about it, that continuous authentication to continue to occur, the shared signals that we just talked about, but really the authorization piece is really key on the other side of it, and making sure that, again, the right person has the right access to the right resources when they need them at the right time. And so for us, it's really moving to that fine grain authorization, getting away from these group authorizations and really fine grain authorization for the specific identity to make sure, listen, if they're an admin and it's, they need privileged access during a certain hour of the day to do their work, they only get that access during that certain hour of the day to do their work. They don't get it outside those hours or windows. Or if they're traveling overseas, right, and maybe they do put a traveler request in and you don't want them to access certain sensitive information when they're traveling overseas, that attribute based saying they're overseas, they have this attribute attached to them that they can only do work when they're in the US, therefore they're blocked from these applications and can't see them. Really getting down to that level of authorization as you work through it. And then obviously the privileged access management, which I know we've talked about, is really important here. And making sure that, again, to Phil's point, it's mitigating the risk, right? And only giving that access when it's needed and making sure that it is being monitored and audited and has governance around all of it. We even talked about governance of all this too. And so with that authorization piece, I'd say putting the governance bubble around all this to be able to govern what's going on in the platform is very important.
Yeah, I was going to say, Christine, thank you for mentioning zero trust, because when I do the presentation, I make sure that I have a slide that talks about how the Apple framework that I created isn't really a replacement for zero trust. It's just an overlay of getting started. This is, if you're not doing anything else, do these things. But ultimately, this is all going to lead to a zero trust type capability. And you mentioned what I like to refer as one of the hardest parts of zero trust is the dynamic authentication and authorization. Being able to say, oh, I see things going on in my environment right now that changes my level of trust or my level of assurance, and then I can go and change what people can access. And you brought up really good points about turning off privilege and reducing access to sensitive data. Those are all really, really key points, which, by the way, are really hard to do. Anybody who's tried to do this is really hard stuff to do.
Yeah, there's no easy button, as we've talked about. And I would say, to add to that, I think if you're looking at this, right, and moving forward, I think you have to make sure that, kind of to Adam's point, when you're looking at third-party providers, that they are neutral, that they do work with your other vendors in your tech stack when you're looking at it, right? You need to ask those questions. Are they in partnership with them? How do they work together? How do they integrate together? Because the last thing you want to do too is integrate custom code, a lot of custom code into your tech stack to do these things, because that's another piece now that you have to worry about securing. It's another piece you have to worry about O&Ming, and it's another piece that is vulnerable and costs a lot of money to maintain and continually update. So just something to think about, especially with cloud technologies, of making sure, especially the third-party providers like Okta, and I was at AWS for 3 years too, that the requirements that you have are fed back into those third parties so that they can help build them into their platform, so you don't have to maintain them and write custom code for some things too is really important. So having that two-way conversation and making it a team effort is really important.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Christine, for your answer on that. What I'd like to do is open this up to questions from the audience, because we wanted to give them about 15 minutes, or actually about 10 minutes, because we're going to need about 5 minutes for concluding remarks. We have a question already about Microsoft adding confusion to FIDO versus passkey. Adam, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I like the comment because it's true. I really don't know what I can say about it. It's just, I think folks really need to understand the difference between the two and how the processes actually work. And if there's something that, especially for a federal agency or any private entity that is planning on using those resources, to make sure that it's implemented in the right way. And going back to what Christine said, I mean, the roles and permissions on the applications, that they're all set to, help facilitate the permitted access is very vital. There are a lot of vendors are saying certain things to, I don't want to say mislead, but that's kind of the road that it's going down. Just know the processes and make sure that it's right for you and the application that you're going to apply it to.
So, and this is, I'm going to just open this question up to everybody since we don't have a lot of questions from the audience, but I think this is actually really relevant, both from an enterprise level and a consumer level. So the major major cloud providers, let's say Google, Google, and actually I don't know if Amazon's doing it. Google, Microsoft, Apple have all come up with their own passkey approaches, and they're all different. And I think those are mainly targeted to consumer level solutions. I'm not familiar with whether Okta has a passkey solution, so I'm going to let Christine talk about that first. But then, what are the benefits and what are the risks that we should be talking about for these different passkey solutions across these different vendors? And Christine, you want to start? You're on mute, Christine.
I was on mute. So, with Okta, as we go, Okta works with we can work with Microsoft, we can work with Google, we can work with Apple. So we implement the passkeys, as we said, as this neutral platform over top of everything, as kind of like an identity broker, if you think about it that way. So we can integrate with any of them as we work through this. The one point I want to bring up is, if you're thinking about passkeys or you're working on FIDO, what you really need to do is break down your use cases of where you would use them, right? Because there's different reasons to use different ones, maybe for different purposes, and really understanding what those use cases are, and then really doing a POC or POV around that with what you're selecting to make sure they work the way you want them to work. And that's what we've seen successful with our customers. And the POC or POV doesn't have to be long-term, right? We can build something in a day and you can test it for a week, 2 weeks, a day if you want to, but that's what we've seen successful, is really testing your use cases and building out the use cases for the different types of users you're going to have using those different applications and in different environments, right? Like Phil brought up, right? There may be mobile environments, right, where you're using a phone. We do a lot with law enforcement too, in the police cars, right, and testing those in these, different environments as well, that sometimes they may have internet access, sometimes they don't, right? DoD, same thing. So we have, there's solutions out there for all of this, but really testing what those are and the environments that they're going to be in is really important.
Thank you. Adam, Phil, do you want to add to that?
You're on mute, Phil.
Phil did what I did.
All right. How about now? Is that better?
Yes.
That's great.
All right. Too many mute buttons here. Adam and Christine covered this really well, so I don't have anything to add on the technical side. But it's a reminder of how hard this stuff is. Like, my team has really smart people, but our day job is collecting, analyzing, publishing the president's budget. It's not identity. Identity is something we do to accomplish our day job. If I can depend on Adam's team or Christine's team or somebody else to do the hard part for me, it's going to make my life a lot easier, and it's going to make my systems a lot more secure. So don't try to invent it yourself. Find a third party that can provide you the services you need and the expertise. There's going to be some level of auditing and making sure that these things really are what they say they are. Somebody tells me that they are identity assurance level 2, but I find out that they're really 1, or they tell me they're 3, but I find out they're really 2. These things are important, and make sure you partner with folks who can do that difficult, geeky technical work for you and with you.
Go ahead, Ad.
Yeah, if I can add just a little bit to that. So one of the things that I'm responsible for is the external user management. We do have a federated identity broker, which is called XMS, external user management. What I love about passkey, FIDO, and all those authentication means, and upcoming technology like mobile driver's license, this actually gives each individual user the capacity to actually control their authentication and their identity. We can actually allow the user to identity proof. And again, this is up to the application if they choose to accept that that path, right? But we can allow them to use mobile driver's license to identity proof themselves, and then use their FIDO or passkey option as an authentication means to get in. So that really gives the user control of their identity. With that, we do our due diligence to make sure that we have a robust system that will catch fraud and all the other items. So we do make it safe, and we do use many credential service providers with XMS. We have many different methods for authentication and identity proofing. So we hopefully make Phil's job easier and Christine's job easier, because we're kind of like a one-stop shop, right? But with that, I'll stop there if you have any other questions.
Actually, I want to build on that and tell one of Adam's success stories and what happens when things go bad, without naming names. He had multiple ways for agencies to get, or for users to get into his system. And one of those ways, which was really heavily used, was determined to not be as secure as they thought it was. Because Adam and his team were doing the hard work and staying ahead of the risks and the security, and because they had implemented multiple ways to get in, it was easy for him to change the method and move to a different service provider. We kind of did the same thing with Max, in that we had user ID password, we had PIV cards, we had tokens, we had other ways to get in. When we had to quickly close off one of those things, we could quickly move to one of the others. So having a service provider that really understands and implements different mechanisms is just really important to you.
Actually, that is really good to hear. It's always good to know that our taxpayer dollars are well spent on building really good stuff. And I like the fact that most of the information you guys have mentioned, both Adam and Phil, is stuff that's publicly available. You can go download the NIST special publication 800-63 and get the latest version and see how they worked on this. I will say the stuff tends to be a little bit dry to read unless you're really, really geeky. And because I have read a bunch of it, and it gives you the ability to kind of help build frameworks to see how to approach this and how to approach these problems in a very consistent way across your organization and across your supply chain. We're really getting close to the end of the hour, so before we sign off, I figured I'd give each one of our guests a few minutes to kind of give final thoughts. And I'm going to start with Phil. Phil, would you like to give some final thoughts?
Sure, thank you. So thanks to Nat and Katie and NTT for hosting this. I really appreciate it. And Christine and Adam for your great insights. And for all those of you who are attending, thanks for being here. The identity management and authentication are critical tools. We've talked about that a lot. Make sure you understand your users and your data, and that you protect them appropriately. Some things that you have in your systems require a very high level of protection. Make sure that you implement that. And your systems themselves require a very high level of protection. Make sure that you protect your systems, because once somebody compromises your system, they can get into your customers' data, and that's not okay. Definitely move away from passwords. Estimates as high as 50% of passwords have been compromised. A lot of users are using the same password for multiple systems. Just other than your very, very, very least sensitive stuff, just don't do it. Don't use it. Use other methods. There are other methods available. If you use a service provider that implements multiple methods, that makes your life much easier, because as you phase out one method, you can move into another. Stay current. The field is constantly changing. The bad actors are very smart and very creative. You got to stay ahead of them, and your service providers have to stay ahead of them. And then, I keep saying leverage shared services, leverage commercial services, leverage shared investments. As I said, my team is really great at building budget systems, but it'd be great if we could depend on Adam's team to do the identity management piece. And so we've started those conversations. I don't know where they'll go. I've moved on to kayaking and bird watching, but the team will continue that stuff. So I think that's all.
Thanks, Phil, and I hope you enjoy your kayaking and bird watching. It sounds like lots of fun. Adam, do you want to go next?
Sure. I want to thank everyone and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I geek out on this topic, and going off of what Phil was stating, hopefully the processes that we're hopefully going to implement are going up, right? So, like I said, just keep your eyes and ears open for the near future. My team has done a lot of work to get where we are, and we have a very solid platform that could help facilitate a federated trust network for the federal government. So that's just not for the external user. I mean, it's for government to government, actually creating the FAL, enhancing zero trust. I do want to get that in there, as Christine was stating. But, we're doing a lot of great things, and we're always going to do the right thing. I will never put my name on something that is not right. And that's basically the philosophy of all of HHS and, within this ecosystem. Everything we do is thoroughly vetted, gone through, and we have everything, staged correctly. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are approached with certain items from Phil's team. And, hopefully we can help facilitate it as a government-wide process and make life better for a lot of folks, hopefully. We'll see. But thank you. And that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Christine, would you like to take a couple minutes?
Yeah, those are two hard acts to follow, and I just, again, want to thank everybody for allowing me to be here today, especially Nate and Katie and NTT Data. I think, a lot of great points brought up. I think in the world, my ideal world would be, I'm a former federal government employee who's retired, right? I have identities still in the federal government and systems. And then now I'm a resident, right, of Virginia. So I have resident accounts, right? And then I am a local resident of Fairfax. I have Fairfax accounts, right? And at some point, I wish, hopefully our government, right, can wrap their hands around all that and have a single identity that even I own my own identity, right? This whole of government approach is one thing. And we talk to the state and locals a lot about that whole of government approach, especially because the local governments don't have enough money really for that cybersecurity piece. So how do you help them, right? And we're very involved in those discussions. But I think one of the things the two things I really want to bring up is, again, going beyond MFA, what we've seen is a lot of agencies, as we've been on this journey for identity, are like, okay, check, I got MFA, check, I have SSO, I'm kind of done with identity. And that's not the case at all, right? As Phil brought up, it's a constantly changing environment, and Adam's shown it by how the policies and NIST is continually updating as well and talking about that. You have to go beyond MFA. It's not just MFA anymore. It was a great start, and if you don't have it yet, it's great to get started there, but you have to go beyond that. And again, to the point, building neutral, right? Having something that's neutral that can integrate within your tech stack. You don't always have to rip and replace, right? Making sure things can interoperate with each other and complement each other. And then from just my perspective, being former government, now in private sector, we want to be part of the team, right? We want to help make the world a better and safer place for people and their identities. So just, being part of that team is exceptional. So thank you again for having us today and letting us be part of that team.
Thanks, Christine. And we're just about done. Thanks to all of our guests for coming and listening to our presentation panel discussion. We're going to be doing another one of these. Our next webinar will be patching and updating. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you, everyone, for being here.